good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today Educational Podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We are the publishers of HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, HRO Today APAC, and the producers of the HRO Today forums and educational conferences held around the world and manage the HRO Today Association. Today we're going to talk about a very practical and very tactical issue. Every HR department in the world is reliant on external partners to provide some of their service delivery model. Everyone has to outsource. There's different levels, different definitional constructs. Any word you want to use, everyone has to use partners. No one can have everything in-house. So it occurred to us that one of the issues that HR departments are facing is how do you select partners? And certainly one of the most expensive line items that you can have in your HR budget if you do use an external partner is recruitment process outsourcing. So we thought we'd go to someone who's an expert on partnerships between recruitment outsourcing companies and HR departments, large companies, and ask him how companies best partner. So we're thrilled to be joined by Peter Simandl, who is the Senior Vice President for Talent Solutions for Resource Solutions. Peter has got more than 20 years of experience. Peter, sorry for admitting that to the crowd. As an executive for some of the largest recruitment outsourcing and talent solutions companies in the world, currently with Resource Solutions, one of our most highly rated RPO and MSP service providers, a global company that spans US, EMEA, Asia, APAC marketplaces as well. And one of the most highly rated on the HR Today Baker's dozen. Resource Solutions also has a great consulting arm and market intelligence products out there, and one of the top providers. So Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Elliot, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for the contribution. Anything you want to add on Resource Solutions? I mean, I sort of took away your 60-second pitch, but anything that you'd like to sort of highlight about RS?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. So Resource Solutions, I think, in the North American market might be new to some of you out there. So I thought maybe I'd share just a few points. So Resource Solutions is a global provider of outsourced recruitment and consultancy services. We provide the most flexible RPO solutions in a few ways. I've kind of narrowed this down to a top three. We do full life cycle recruitment that could be either enterprise, divisional, or functional. We also welcome hybrid models where we partner with an organization's in-house team to either complete or elevate that internal function. And then, of course, project-based, which I think is really just helping so many organizations in their own scalability efforts, whether they're in growth mode or need an infusion of assistance or M&A activities where they need some assistance in new markets and development.
That's great. And so that actually, sort of is an interesting segue because you have a lot of different ways that an HR department could conceivably partner with you. They've got to be able to select the right model. Obviously, they want your recommendation on that, but they've got to be able to select it and build the right kind of partnership. So as I said, all of the groups in HR, all HR departments are dependent on their partnerships and outsourcing. So looking specifically at talent acquisition and recruitment, because that's typically the lion's share or a very large part of the HR budget, some companies enter into partnerships that just don't turn out well. And we all know, we've all heard the stories. It's a small percentage of failure, but it reflects badly on both the provider and the internal HR executive who hired them. I mean, it can be a career-ending decision to make a long-term commitment to the wrong service provider. What kind of questions or qualifications should a company ask a potential RPO partner to make sure that they're the right fit? And I'm talking about both culturally and programmatically. How should the companies qualify a provider?
Yeah, Elliot, if we were on video for our audience today, you'd see me nodding yes with a big smile on my face saying, yeah, this is a topic that's pretty important. And over the 20 years plus that I've been in this space, I've certainly experienced RPO programs fail and fail miserably. So the advice that I would give, and the advice I give every day when I'm talking with prospective clients who are either first generation or they're even second or third, and some fourth generation with RPO programs that didn't work as well, trying to, change the program going forward. The first thing that I always like to do is take a very simple approach, is look at your current state versus your future state aspirations, and then identify the gaps. And the question that every organization who's considering recruitment process outsourcing or RPO is first to identify and align on what the organization wants to address. And depending on where you are in your talent acquisition function maturity, this is going to be very different for your organization. And so where I've seen RPO programs fail is when it was an executive level decision that didn't have buy-in from the department leaders. And what I've found that most of the problem is, or one of the biggest, most important challenges, is there's a disconnect between C-level executives on the future strategy and then the line leaders who own the function and manage the function on a day-to-day basis. So cost savings, for example, might be a major problem that organizations want to address. So they want more flexibility and agility in their function. So they have to really align first off on what they're trying to fix or what they want to achieve, because not every future situation is something that's fixed, that's implying something's broken. It's an evolution potentially. It's where we are now is good, but what got us here won't quite get us there. We've all heard that phrase. And I think there's also another way of looking at this if you have a current program that might be failing, is you want to understand what was the solution, the wrong solution. Was the provider unable to actually fix the problem? Or internal stakeholders may be disconnected from the vision. Like I shared earlier, that's also something that if you're an incumbent program and you're looking to grow from there. Also, I think it's really important to get key stakeholders involved. So when you identify and align what the problem is, you all agree, and this is the problem you want to fix, then I think a solid understanding of, and evaluation is probably a better word than understanding, of what your options are. And I always like to look at the buy, build, borrow method of analyzing what your options to solve the problem are. And then you engage your key stakeholders to get involved in that. What I've learned also where there were failed programs or programs that were in implementation and had a rough first year was when stakeholders felt like something was being done to them rather than being a part of and having accountability in the decision to go forward. Not all stakeholders agree that RPO might be the right solution, but that's why it's so important to evaluate what your options are, and then you could choose the best option based on that analysis.
So it sounds like you're almost saying that, even before we get to the question of what you should ask a potential provider or potential partner, there's a lot of questions companies need to ask internally and have the answers drilled down before they even get into the conversation with a provider. Is that a fair sort of
Yes,
what you're saying?
You're about 90% there. The one piece that I would say is, yes, you have to understand what the problem is and the outcome that you want. That's something that, yes, some providers can actually help you to get there. If you're struggling to say, wait, we know that these are all problems, but we don't know what's the most important. That's kind of a role that I believe that I can fill in and bring value to a conversation, is help an organization or help guide an organization based on questions and dialogue on how to come to a right decision on what's the most important reason for making whatever change that might be moving towards a RPO solution or something else. They don't have to have all the answers before they engage a provider, but you have to have a very good idea what problem you want to solve for. And then I would love to engage at that point to start evaluating what your options are and how RPO can be part of the solution, because RPO is not for every organization. And I'll be the first to say that up front.
If you're an HR leader in a company, it's not really an interrogation, and I'll use that word not in a negative sense. It's not really a process whereby you ask questions and get answers, but it's observational, where you describe your problem to the provider and then watch the way they work with you to craft a solution. Is that a better model for sort of qualifying the providers? And that's a little more time-consuming, a little more intimate, if you will, because we see these bid processes where they have 13, 14, 15, potential, RFP respondents. If you're going to really watch the way the provider processes and thinks through problems with you, you probably should get it down to 2 or 3 that you want to focus on and then go through that process with them. Is that a better model?
Yeah, I think when you think about from an organizational perspective, they have to think about how much time do I actually have to dedicate to this purchasing process? And then they have to navigate their own buying process, which is very difficult in so many circumstances with especially some of the large organizations. So how do you actually engage RPO providers? And I think there's something to say about the way that you interact and the questions that an RPO would ask you to gauge, it's sort of like an interview. If you think about when you're interviewing candidates to come work on your team, the questions they ask are almost more valuable than the questions you ask them to answer. It gives you an idea of how they think, how they operate, and then what it might look like to be in a partnership with them. That's, one way of looking at it.
Interesting. So let me ask you this question. One of the things that practitioners complain about, the buyer side, is that most RPO providers in the process, when they're asking questions, getting answers, they sound alike.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And everyone claims that their RPO products, since that's your area of specialty, but it could be learning, whatever service they're buying, that everything is heavily customized. Okay. It's heavily customized to the needs of the client. But in truth, and particularly large organizations, you've worked for some very large ones and some smaller ones, the large providers really can't do this. They're really trying to fit the client into their service delivery model, into their product box. All right. Now, RS is part of a group of growing mid-market oriented providers, and you tout flexibility and agility, right? And I think you actually use this sort of very cool marketing term of flex agility in your marketing. I don't know who came up with that, but it sounds smart. Anyway, so this flex agility approach, what is the difference in your approach? And how can a buyer ascertain whether a provider is really being flexible in their approach to an engagement? How can they tell if it's really real, that you're really adapting your solution to their needs?
You have me again smiling and nodding if we were on video right now, Elliot. So great question. Love the flex agility. I'd love to respond to that by really providing a definition to our audience. So you think about flexible. So what does it mean to be flexible? It means to adapt to changes in a planned and deliberate manner. Flexible organizations have systems and processes and a structure that could be modified to accommodate the changing circumstances without really compromising any overall efficiency that they might gain. Agility, on the other hand, refers to organizations' ability to respond quickly and effectively to unexpected changes. And an agile organization, has a high degree of responsiveness and is able to make quick decisions. So when you think about flexibility, I think flexibility is more of like the ways of operating. I think about when I have negotiated agreements for an RPO solution with customers, I think about what's the contractual flexibility, if any. Typically contracts are somewhat rigid. What reputation do you have around? Do you manage relationships by the contract, which I've never been a fan of because that doesn't really, go forward with the definition. It's also the way services are delivered. I've had a pleasure of a part of my career of going into the delivery side, and I've had customers that were 8+ year customers say, we're still measuring the performance on the same SLAs that were set when the contract started. So is that really flexible? And, when you think of agility, I think of the ways agility helps is to really pivot. I like the word pivot in this case. Pivot to meet the business environment, if we were to put together like a phrase that would be associated with that. So I think about organizations that say, we want to partner with an RPO provider because we want to leverage the ability to scale up quickly to meet the hiring demand. And that's versus, if you think about that buy, build, borrow methodology, what would they have to do to scale their own in-house team? Well, they either have to hire contract recruiters, own the training and development, or they would hire FTEs, which what happens then when they have to scale down quickly? Then they have to lay people off. And that's a very difficult thing to do in an organization because it has a wake that sometimes affects those who are left in the organization. So this is where, leaders that have heard about RPO and say we need flexibility and scalability and agility, the more importantly is that agility piece in our business. It's tied to the business outcomes, the way that talent acquisition has to adapt adapt to the business needs. So if you're an organization that is very static and predictable, first off, congratulations, because there's not many of you out there. But if you're in other businesses where there's peaks and troughs and you have to be agile, in my experience, I've seen RPO and especially multi-generational RPOs come when the organization looks at their talent acquisition functional strategy and they say, we don't want to give up all of our in-house function. So we're going to do it in percentages so that we can still have that agility piece within our business function. And I've seen that in splits where it was 25, 75, 30, 70, and probably the more common is 40, 60, where 40% of the workforce plan can be executed by in-house and then 60% is scalable so that it gives their organization that scalability. And I've experienced RPO programs that went down from 10 resources all the way up to 200 resources and would do that once or twice a year. So the business does achieve that cost savings when you look at it that way. Sorry, kind of a long-winded answer, but hope that's helpful.
But a great one. You make some really good points about, if you're a buyer and you ask a provider, how do you flex and scale internally? And they can't give you a quick answer to that question. You get into the mechanisms about what, are you using FTEs or using PTs? Do you have contractors? Do you have full-time employees? If they're not really fluent in being able to answer that question, they're probably not that flexible. You can't provide a flexible service if you don't already run a flexible business, if I was going to make it into a headline. But great insights from the practitioner side. For those of you in the audience who are practitioners that are listening, you have to know what your problems are, and then you have to really get the provider to partner with you on thinking through the solutions and watch how they're interacting with you and your team. And once again, does the solution that they're providing make sense? If it's not common sense, don't do it. And then the other thing is that flexibility question. Everyone is going to say they do it. But, as Peter just explained, if the business is not fluent in the language of being flexible and agile, they probably aren't. And, if you ask them about how flexibility applies to their business, not yours, you might get a very surprising answer. Great insights, Peter. We'll have you back to keep exploring this topic at some point in the future. That's about all the time we have now, but thank you so much for taking part in this HRO Today Educational Podcast. We'll have you back soon.
I'd love to. Thank you.
And for you in our audience, thank you for your time and attention. This is Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of HRO Today, and we'll look forward to having you join us on another HRO Today Educational Podcast very soon.